I'm going to tell you about a relatively recent research project that it's huge. It's much bigger than what I'm going to be able to talk about today. I'm just going to pick out a little piece of it. The topic is color, music, and emotion, and I'm going to be talking about it in synesthetes and non-synesthetes. And if you don't know what a synesthete is, I'm going to tell you in just a minute. That was actually the way in which I got interested in this. There's this fascinating subject condition, neurological condition called synesthesia, in which people have spontaneous experiences given one sensory input, such as hearing. They will have spontaneous sensory experiences in other modalities, such as seeing colors or shapes or tasting something and feeling prickly sensations. There's all kinds of different synesthesias. The one I'm going to be talking about is music to color synesthesia, also called sound to color or chromesthesia. It's quite rare. These estimates you have to take with a grain of salt. Maybe something on the order of 1 person in 2,000 has it, more women than men, but who knows? There could be all kinds of biases in that. If you go and look on the website, you'll find that there are a number of very famous painters and musicians who are synesthetes. These, of course, are undocumented cases because we now have ways in which we can evaluate people for synesthesia, whether they really have it or not. These are people who claim to have something like it. So just to give you some notion of what it's like to have it, I'm going to play a little clip from a movie called The Soloist, in which it's a story about a street musician played by Jamie Foxx, who's discovered by an LA Times reporter played by Robert Downey Jr. Fox, whose name I think was Nathaniel Ayers, was a student at Juilliard who had a psychotic break. And Robert Downey Jr. discovers him on the streets and wants to write about him and befriends him and tries to be a mentor, takes him to the LA Symphony while they're doing a rehearsal of a Beethoven symphony, and the Disney artists, actually we're going to have the lights out. Is that possible? Yeah. So this is what the graphics artists at Disney thought that his synesthetic experience might be like. In the movie, he closes his eyes, and this is what he sees. I wish I could play more of it, but I only have 20 minutes, so I want to move on. You can have the lights back up. Thank you very much. I was interested in this phenomenon and wanted to study it, but I didn't have any synesthetes at hand, and so we decided to start exploring this general topic with non-synesthetes, just regular folks like you and me. And the question that we initially started with is music associated with color in non-synesthetes? We don't really know. And if it is it direct, as it's actually thought to be in synesthetes, that you have a sort of direct connection from the auditory cortex to the visual cortex, and it's the activation of those neurons that causes synesthesia? Or maybe it's mediated by something else, namely emotion. I should apologize for the projector here. The colors that you see on this is nothing like the colors that they actually are. But I can't change that. I tried to change it during the intermission and obviously failed. The third question is, can we actually study these questions scientifically and get evidence about this? So, before I can tell you actually about synesthesia, I need to sort of orient you to the scientific world of color as a color scientist studies it. To do these studies, we picked a sample of 37 colors, which consisted of 8 different hues, the 4 so-called unique hues of red, green, that's supposed to be yellow. That's supposed to be green. We got a blue. Well, anyway. So these are the 8 hues that we used, and I call this this one cyan. That's supposed to be blue-green, and this is chartreuse. That's yellow-green. And then we sampled these same 8 hues at 4 what we call cuts through this color space. I forgot to mention. So this is a color space. And in a color space, it's a representation of colors where each color occupies a point in this space, a 3-dimensional space in this case. And the more similar the colors are to each other, the closer together they are in this space. So it's sort of a map of colors in a very compact geometrical fashion. Okay, so we have these 8 hues. We sample them in 4 different what I call cuts through the space, one of which is the saturated cuts. Those are the most brilliant, vivid versions of those colors. Another cut, which is sort of halfway between each of these saturated cuts and white, which lives at the top. The muted cut, which is halfway between the saturated colors and neutral gray in the center, and the dark cut, which is halfway between the saturated colors and black at the bottom. Plus, we've got these 5 different levels of gray from black through these intermediate, well, that looks white, but obviously, like I said. So those are the 37 colors that we're going to use in this study. And in this experiment, the crucial task we had people do was to listen to 18 different selections of classical orchestral music by Bach, Mozart, and Brahms. And for each composer, we found an example that was either slow, medium, or fast in tempo, and major and minor in mode. So I'm going to play a couple of these so you get the idea. We're going to do Bach because that's what I do later. So this is Bach fast major. Okay, got the idea? Fast because it's got a fast tempo, and major because it's major. And a lot of people can't tell the difference between major and minor, but they can tell the difference between happy and sad. And if you just think major is happy and minor is sad, you'd actually be right about 90% of the time. Okay, so here now I'm going to contrast that with Bach, same composer, but now slow tempo, minor mode. Here, the tempo is very much slower, and it sounds sad, so it's minor. Okay. So that's an example, and while people were listening to that music, we showed them this array of 37 colors, which mysteriously is missing one. and we would have them then pick out, let's try Mozart. Here's a Mozart. Minor, but fast, okay? No. Oh, there we go. So now just think about what colors would you pick to go with this? It's kind of lively, so you want to pick a lively color maybe or something, but it's got an edge to it. Whatever. Okay, so that's the task. And here's the data. Okay, so what I'm showing you here, we had 48 subjects. These are the first choice. We had people pick 3 different colors that fit the music best. We also had them pick the colors that fit the music worst. But these are the top picks for each subject for the Bach pieces. So I played these for you before. I'll just remind you, maybe. So if these colors look good, they would look very yellow and bright and saturated. I could turn my computer around and show you. And the ones that are down here in the left corner, those are the ones that people picked. Now you can presumably tell just by looking at these arrays that there's a big difference here, that the slower pieces were darker, cooler, and less vivid, more gray, and the faster music and also the more major music was lighter, warmer, and more vivid colors. So we actually quantify this. I'm not going to bother telling you how, and I'll just show you what the data look like to give you some examples of them. What we do now is we break these down into the 4 dimensions of color. Saturation, that's the distance out from the center of that double ice cream cone thing. And what we find is, as the tempo of the music increases, how vivid the colors are that people pick very much increases. These are really error bars here, so these are gigantic differences between people. Not between people, gigantic differences relative to the differences between people. Slow, medium, and fast, again, for lightness, same sort of thing. As the music gets faster and more major, the colors that people pick are lighter colors. Not very much going on with red versus green here, but yellow and blue do the same thing as saturation and lightness. As the tempo gets faster and the music is in major mode, the colors tend to get yellower that people pick. All right?
CMA stuff.
That's that funny business I skipped over. I mean, it's just how we integrated. They picked 3 colors, the best choices, 3 colors, worst choices. It's just a linear weighted average of the colors, the values on these dimensions of the colors people picked. So in addition to this, we actually had our associates in Mexico do a complete replication of this study. They begged us not to make them do it. They said, we don't listen to this kind of music down here. We want to do it with mariachi bands. Please let us do it with mariachi bands. We said, no, stick to the program. And we did the same experiment, and you get essentially Xerox copies of the American results in Mexico. We're in the process of trying to do a much more complete replication in Turkey with traditional Turkish people who don't listen to Western music and so forth, but we don't have any results there. Well, but why? Why is there this particular complicated pattern of results for the relationship between the colors people pick and the musical features, the high-level musical features? These are not the individual frequencies that Frankel was talking about. These are, in fact, large-scale structures, musical structures, how fast the whole piece is going and whether it's in major and minor mode, which actually is fairly small differences. There's only a couple of notes that are altered between major and minor. That seems to be what people are responding to. Well, we think that the answer is that actually it's emotion, that people listen to the music and they have, I think they have an emotional experience or a quasi-emotional experience to the music, and then that there's overlap between the emotions that they experience to the music and emotional associations of the colors, and so they pick the colors that go with the music in terms of the common underlying emotions that they evoke or are associated to. So how could we test this hypothesis? Well, it's actually pretty simple. We just show people each of the colors individually, and we have them rate each color in terms of these 8 different emotional terms. So a color like this one, well, this is supposed to be bright yellow. How happy is it? How lively? How strong? How calm? They make a rating along a slider scale for each one of these colors. And then we do the same thing with the music. We play the music, each piece of music. Let's do something. What would you like? How about, we'll do that one again, the sort of. How happy is it? Not super happy. It's lively though. It's strong. It's not calm. You know, and they're making these ratings with their slider scales. All right. So now we've got the emotional content of each of these 18 pieces of music, the experiences that people had, and we also have the same thing for the colors. The question that we want to ask now is, how does the emotionality of the music correspond to the emotionality of the colors they picked to go with the music? All right. So we are going to be now looking at the ratings that people gave to those 18 pieces of music, and for each one of those we're going to plot this CMA score, that is, how happy versus sad are the colors that people picked as going with the music, right? How predictable is the color association in terms of emotionality between the music and the colors? And the answer is very, very, well, you can't see half the points here, but in any case, the correlation between these two variables is 0.97. Now, I need to point out here that this is the flakiest experiment I've ever done. You get a bunch of people, you play music to them and say, pick out the colors that go with the music. And you don't say anything about what goes with what. If they say, what do you mean? You just say, well, just pick the ones that you think go with the music. And that's the only explanation we give people. And yet, This is the highest correlation I've ever seen in data, until, of course, I looked at Lively versus Dreary, where the correlation is 0.9. For those of you who don't know what correlations are, they go from -1 to 1. 1.0 means that all of these points lie exactly along a straight line, and they almost do. The ratings of strong versus weak, a correlation of 0.96. And for calm versus angry, it's only 0.89. Most people would, psychologists anyway, most psychologists would kill for that correlation. But here it's the outlier. So our conclusion here is that it appears to be the case that emotion mediates these color, music to color associations. And there's some more data here that we've shown, for example, that people will, you can play the music to them instead of asking them to pick the color that goes with the music, you ask them to pick the emotional face. We show them a bunch of faces that are happy faces and sad faces and real people's faces, where it's the same person, nothing differs except the emotions, expressions that they have. And in fact, people match the happy music with the happy expressions. And you can do the same thing with color and faces. You can show people the faces, pick the color that go with the faces, or vice versa. It all works. All the correlations are above 0.9, and it seems to be that it must be emotion. So our conclusion about these non-synesthetes, that's just way we have to talk about these people. You can't call non-synesthetes normals because that implies that synesthetes are abnormal, and they're not. They just have something extra. And we find that they are related, and they're related by emotion. And in fact, we can study these questions scientifically. Now here's the tip of the iceberg statement. So all I've shown you is this one study with classical orchestral music. We've since done it with extraordinarily well-controlled single-line piano melodies where the melodic contour is the same and where you can just exactly say what the tempo is, and you can make it go twice as fast or half as fast in different octaves and stuff like that. We've done it with hip-hop music. We've done it with 34 different kinds of genres from all over the world, popular and folk music and so forth. And it holds up in all these domains, even at the level of instrumental timbres. The sound of a harpsichord is happier than the sound of a tuba, even playing the same note and so forth. But I'm not going to go into all that. What I am going to do is to talk now about synesthetes. We already know that music is associated with, this says music, it should say color, in synesthetes. But are they directly connected, which is what everybody sort of assumes, that there's like sort of direct pathway, neural pathway between the auditory and visual cortex of some sort? Or might it be the case that it's mediated by emotion? So we've just shown that for non-synesthetes, it seems to be mediated by emotion. The question that we're going to ask here is, are there similar things going on with the synesthetes? Okay, 2 minutes, you're kidding. All right. So we found 15 different music-to-color synesthetes, and we have matched controls, people who are just like them except for having synesthesia. And we give them the same 18 pieces of classical music. The non-synesthetes have the same task. Pick the colors that go with the music. The synesthetes, we say, choose the 3 colors in order that are most like your color experiences when you're listening to the music. So, you know, the responses are the same. The only thing that's different is that the synesthetes are having experiences of color, and they're reporting on what kind of experiences of color they're having. So we did it with lots of different kinds of things. I'm only going to tell you about the orchestral music. Here's the data from our non-synesthetes. You can see that this is fast major versus slow minor, that these colors are lighter, more vivid, and if you can see, you may even be able to see that they're also warmer and yellower. What about the synesthetes? Well, here's the data from the synesthetes, and you can see the same kind of qualitative difference. These crosshatch patches just mean that some of the synesthetes would only see one color, and so we told them that for the second and third, they just click on this other thing. Those are the other things. And you can look at these data in terms of the way that we plotted it before. The interesting things are, first of all, that they have roughly similar kinds of effects. Whoops. I had something else here. And if you look at the overall correlation between the synesthetes data and the non-synesthetes, there's a pretty reasonable correlation between them. It's much higher if you look at the non-hue dimensions of color, that is the saturation and the lightness, than it is if you look at the hue dimensions of between the correlation between them. There's a much closer correlation for lightnesses and saturations. And if you look at these emotional correlations, so these are the correlations, those are the scatter plots I showed you before for the non-synesthetes, you find that they're not as high as they were before because we have a much smaller sample of people. But if you look at the correlations for the synesthetes, some of them are just as strong. So happy versus sad is essentially the same, and active-passive is in the same ballpark for the synesthetes and the non-synesthetes. But for strong, weak, agitated, calm, and, oh boy. See, this says much weaker here. It's so weak you can't see it. But the correlation for calm versus agitated in the non-synesthetes is 0.79. It's only 0.36 for the synesthetes. So we're finding if evidence of emotional mediation in the synesthetes, but not as strong or pervasive as it is in the non-synesthetes. And if you ask me at this point, what does this mean? What do you want to conclude from this? I would say that there do seem to be experiences that are mediated by emotion in the synesthetes. Because the happy-sad effects are equally strong in both groups, but there are other emotions that are reduced or maybe not even there at all. And I think that what's going on, if I had to say right now, is that in the non-synesthetes, what you get in this task is everything seems to be going through emotion, but in the synesthetes, there's probably both a direct path and an indirect path. What we don't know now, I mean, what I've shown, I think, without any question, is that there are these emotional effects in synesthetes as well as in non-synesthetes. They're qualitatively similar. They may be quantitatively not the same. But we don't really know whether they are online, what I call online effects, or whether they're sort of frozen into a neural substrate. That is to say, it might be the case that the synesthetes have learned these emotional connections when they're quite young, and then they get frozen into this sort of lower level connection. There are conceptual experiments that you can do to sort these things out, but I'm not sure that they're actually doable. You have to find synesthetes who are willing to take nasty drugs or put themselves in one of those brain zappers that Allison talked about, and I'm not prepared to go there. But this is the provisional conclusion that I'm at. I want to thank my sponsors and my collaborators, and our most important sponsor, which is Amy's Natural Frozen Foods. So when we started this experiment, no reputable or unreputable funding agency would fund us, but my collaborator Karen Schloss's father was a marketing executive at Amy's, and he gave us several $1,000s worth of coupons for Amy's frozen pizzas, and that's how we paid for this. Now I should say, as a plug at the end, I'm still having trouble finding funding for this project, believe it or not. So if anybody has any really good ideas who might be interested in this, besides the National Science Foundation, who already turned us down, please let me know. Thank you very much.